James Parker sat at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the quiet house. His hands cradled a mug of coffee gone cold, but he didn't have the energy to heat it again. It was past midnight, and he should have been in bed hours ago. Instead, he stared blankly at the pile of bills stacked beside his laptop, their deadlines creeping closer. The day had been long, longer than most. Then, his 5-year-old son had thrown a tantrum about wearing socks to school, while Emma, his 8-year-old daughter, had refused to speak to him all afternoon after he'd forgotten about her class project. Guilt weighed heavily on him, as it always did. Every mistake felt magnified when there was no one else to share the blame. He glanced at the framed photo sitting on the counter. It was from happier times. Emma as a toddler on his shoulders, Sarah holding baby Ben with a radiant smile. That was before Sarah walked out 3 years ago, leaving behind a short note, but no explanation. He'd never stopped wondering why, but after a while, he stopped asking. The answers wouldn't change the fact that he was alone now. The creak of the stairs startled him. Emma stood at the doorway in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed bunny. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered. James forced a smile. "Nightmares again?" She nodded, and he gestured for her to sit on his lap. As he wrapped his arms around her small frame, she rested her head against his chest. He wished he could take away her worries, but lately, she'd seemed more anxious than ever. Was it because of him? Because he was too distracted by work and bills to notice the little things? He didn't know. After Emma finally drifted off in her bed, James sat back down at the table. His thoughts returned to the mountain of responsibilities he faced every day: meals, school pickups, bedtime routines, and work deadlines. He was juggling too much, and no matter how hard he tried, something always slipped through the cracks. The kids deserved more. They deserved better. The next morning, James's longtime friend Emily called. She had a knack for showing up just when he needed to vent. "You sound exhausted," she said after he answered. "Just the usual," James replied, rubbing his temples. "Ben's acting out, Emma's not talking to me, and I'm barely holding it together." Emily hesitated before saying, "I might have an idea. It's not perfect, but it could help." James frowned. "What kind of idea?" "There's this woman I know, Olivia. She's a friend of a friend. She's been through a rough patch, lost her job, trying to get back on her feet. She's looking for a place to stay, and I thought maybe she could help you out? Just until she gets settled." James's first instinct was to say no. The idea of bringing a stranger into his home felt risky, especially with the kids. But the thought of having even a little help with the daily chaos was tempting. "I don't know, Emily," he said finally. "It sounds complicated." "It doesn't have to be," Emily countered. "Olivia's good with kids, and she's not looking for charity. She just needs a safe place for a little while. And let's face it, James, you could use the help." He sighed, conflicted. He'd always prided himself on managing things alone, even when it felt impossible. But as he looked around the house, the cluttered living room, the pile of laundry in the corner, the cereal bowls still on the counter from breakfast, he realized that maybe Emily was right. Maybe he couldn't keep doing this on his own. "All right," he said reluctantly, "but just for a little while." Emily's relief was palpable. "You won't regret it. I'll introduce you to her tomorrow." As James hung up the phone, he felt a strange mix of apprehension and hope. He wasn't sure if opening his home to a stranger was the right decision, but something had to change. For Emma, for Ben, and maybe, just maybe, for himself. The following afternoon, James stood in the doorway, his hand hovering over the handle of the front door as he waited for Olivia to arrive. The space between the moment he'd agreed to let her move in and now felt both far too short and far too long. He'd expected someone older, maybe a little worn from life's struggles, but Olivia was different. She appeared at his doorstep, early, as if she were nervous to be late, holding 2 suitcases and a backpack, her shoulders square despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "James?" Her voice was tentative, as if she were unsure of how to approach him. He nodded, offering a half smile and stepping aside to let her in. "You must be Olivia. Welcome." The warmth in his greeting was genuine, though it felt unfamiliar in the context of this arrangement. He was used to running his own house, controlling every part of it with meticulous care. There was something about this, about letting someone into his home who wasn't family, that felt disorienting. Olivia stepped in, looking around briefly before setting her things down by the door. "Thanks for letting me stay. I promise I won't be any trouble." Her tone was cautious, as if she were already aware of how awkward this situation was. James nodded, though he wasn't sure if he agreed with her assessment. "You're fine," he replied quickly, maybe too quickly. "It's just for a little while, right?" Olivia smiled faintly. Of course. The first few days were nothing like James had imagined. There were no deep, meaningful conversations, no sudden bursts of laughter, or a sense of camaraderie. Instead, Olivia quietly adapted to the rhythms of the house, folding laundry, picking up after the kids, and offering a helping hand when things got too overwhelming. She didn't ask for much in return, just a quiet, steady presence. At dinner that night, Olivia helped set the table, serving the simple pasta dish James had thrown together. Emma and Ben were still adjusting to her presence. Ben eyed Olivia suspiciously as he sat down, his small face scrunched up like he didn't know whether to trust her. Emma was quieter than usual, but there was something different in her eyes, a curiosity that hadn't been there before. "So, Olivia," James began, trying to fill the silence, "how's the new job search going?" "It's a work in progress," Olivia said, her voice hesitant. "I'm hoping to hear back from a few places soon. Just trying to keep my head above water for now." James nodded, not sure how much he wanted to delve into her personal life just yet. Olivia didn't seem like the kind of person who wanted pity or constant probing. But there was something about her, something unspoken, that made him wonder about her past. She was always so careful not to share too much, but there was an underlying sadness in her demeanor that made him want to protect her, if only he knew how. As the days passed, James found himself noticing little things about Olivia. She had a way of moving through the house without causing any disruption, almost as if she were reading the room and adapting accordingly. One morning, when Ben refused to eat his breakfast because the cereal was too soggy, Olivia didn't hesitate. She calmly got up, fetched fresh milk, and made him another bowl without so much as a hint of frustration. Ben didn't even protest. When Emma came home from school with a project she had forgotten to tell James about, it was Olivia who suggested they work on it together. Olivia didn't make it feel like a chore. Instead, she listened as Emma explained the topic, offering guidance without ever taking control. James was watching from the doorway when Emma finally smiled at Olivia, a genuine, soft smile that had been absent for months. It was small, subtle, but James noticed it. Emma had always been distant, her emotions tightly wound up ever since Sarah had left. He hadn't been able to crack that shell, but Olivia had somehow found the key without even trying. That evening, as they sat in the living room, the house a little quieter than usual, James felt a strange shift in the air. Olivia was reading a book, sitting in the chair by the window, while Emma worked on her sketch pad at the table. Ben was lying on the floor, drawing shapes with his crayons. The atmosphere in the room was peaceful, almost serene. He didn't know when it had happened, but suddenly, the house didn't feel so empty. There were sounds of life again, laughter, conversation, the soft thud of crayon on paper. Olivia had started to fill the spaces that had been hollow for so long. It wasn't as though she had solved everything. The hurt from Sarah's departure still lingered in his chest, and the weight of his responsibilities hadn't disappeared. But Olivia's presence, her steady calmness, had brought something back that he hadn't realized he missed. James found himself sitting down beside her one night after the kids had gone to bed. "I didn't expect this," he admitted quietly, looking over at her as she closed the book she had been reading. "I didn't expect it to feel normal again." Olivia smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "Normal's overrated. But it's nice, right?" He nodded, but the words caught in his throat. He had always thought of his life as a solo venture. He had to do everything himself, even when he didn't know how. But for the first time in a long time, he felt the burden lighten, if only slightly. He wasn't alone anymore, not in the way he had been. She didn't need to stay forever. He kept reminding himself of that. This was just a temporary arrangement. But something told him that even after Olivia moved on, things would never quite be the same. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. But for now, it was something he was grateful for. As he climbed into bed later that night, James couldn't help but reflect on the changes that had already started to unfold. The kids were still adjusting, but there was no denying that Olivia's presence had created a sense of balance he hadn't even known he needed. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't such a bad thing to have someone else in their lives. The first week passed in a blur of routines. Olivia kept to herself, quietly becoming a part of the fabric of the house, and it was clear that she wasn't just there for a roof over her head. She slipped into her role like someone who had done this before, helping out without being asked, picking up on the little things James missed, the small details that often got lost in the shuffle of his overburdened schedule. James had never been one to accept help easily. He'd always seen his ability to manage everything as a measure of his worth as a father. But the more he watched Olivia, the more he found himself relying on her presence, even if only in subtle ways. One afternoon, when he was knee-deep in an important conference call, Ben ran into the room, arms flailing.
Dad.
"I can't find my shoes," he shouted, his voice panicked. James quickly raised his hand, signaling for him to wait, trying to finish the call. But Olivia appeared at the door a moment later, stepping in without hesitation. "I've got it," she said, her voice calm. Without another word, she crouched down, gently asking Ben about the shoes. She found them hidden under the couch in a matter of seconds, and Ben, now grinning, dashed out to get ready for school. James watched the whole thing unfold, silently grateful for the interruption. Olivia had a way of handling the little crises of daily life, ones that always felt like massive obstacles when he was alone, that didn't involve shouting or stress. It was as if she had a calmness inside her that spread to those around her. Later that week, after a particularly grueling day of back-to-back meetings and late-night emails, James walked into the kitchen to find Olivia cooking dinner. He'd barely managed to grab a quick sandwich for lunch, his energy drained, his mind spinning. But as he stepped into the kitchen, the aroma of something warm and homemade greeted him. "Hey," she greeted him with a smile, as though it was just another normal evening. "How was your day?" "Long," he replied, sinking into a chair at the kitchen table. "Endless, actually." Olivia didn't comment on his exhaustion. She simply carried on chopping vegetables, her movements fluid and precise. "You should take it easy tonight," she said softly. "You've been running yourself ragged for a while now. You deserve a break." James couldn't remember the last time anyone had told him that. Sure, he'd been told to take care of himself before, but it always felt more like a suggestion than a command. Olivia said it with such quiet authority that it almost felt like a challenge. He wanted to protest, wanted to tell her he couldn't afford to take a break. But for some reason, he didn't. Instead, he watched as she effortlessly continued preparing dinner. By the time the kids came running in from the backyard, their laughter filling the house, a warm meal was ready. There was no question of what they would have for dinner, no last-minute decision-making or hurried takeout. Dinner was ready, and it was one of those simple, comforting meals that didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be shared. As the days passed, the children started to warm to Olivia, though it was a slow process. Emma, reserved and quiet, began to talk to her more. After one particularly frustrating evening where Emma had refused to talk to James about her school day, Olivia stepped in. "What was it like?" Olivia asked softly, sitting beside Emma at the table while they did her homework. Emma looked at her, eyebrows raised in hesitation. "What do you mean?" "You seemed a little upset earlier, and I thought maybe you wanted to talk about it." For a moment, there was silence. James had half expected Emma to shut Olivia down, to retreat further into her shell. But instead, Emma sighed and started to talk. She explained how some of her classmates had been teasing her about her shoes, how they weren't the brand the other kids wore, and how it made her feel small and out of place. Olivia didn't rush to solve the problem. She didn't tell Emma how to fix it or give her advice she wasn't ready to hear. Instead, she just listened, nodding as Emma spoke, validating her feelings without judgment. "You know, I used to feel the same way," Olivia said quietly when Emma finished. "I used to think that if I didn't have the right things, no one would like me. But eventually I realized that what really matters is who I am, not what I wear." Emma's eyes flickered, a little unsure, But there was something in Olivia's words that settled in her chest. James couldn't remember the last time Emma had opened up to anyone like that. Certainly not to him. The bond between the two women was growing, quietly but surely, in ways that felt too delicate to articulate. Then, one evening, when Ben was struggling to finish his coloring project for school, Olivia sat beside him without a word. She didn't rush him, didn't try to speed him up like James often did in the name of getting it over with. Instead, she simply handed him a fresh box of crayons and waited. Ben, fidgeting with his colors, eventually began to relax, his face lighting up as he started to fill in the shapes. "Look, Olivia." Ben held up his drawing, beaming with pride. The vibrant colors filled the page with energy, each crayon mark more deliberate than the last. "I made the sky purple." "That's amazing," Olivia said, her voice full of admiration. "I've never seen a purple sky before. You're a real artist." Ben's grin widened as he stared at his picture, suddenly proud of the little creation in front of him. James, standing in the doorway, watched with a sense of awe. Ben's attention span was usually fleeting, and it was a struggle to keep him focused on anything for more than a few minutes. But with Olivia's gentle encouragement, he'd been able to channel his energy into something that made him proud. James couldn't help but notice the small but important changes happening within the house. It wasn't anything dramatic, no life-altering events, but the house had begun to feel like a home again. There were moments of laughter, shared experiences, and even peace. Olivia's presence was transforming the house in ways James hadn't expected, filling in the empty spaces that had lingered there for so long. Even though he hadn't asked for any of this, he hadn't asked for help, for someone else to come in and fill the gaps. Olivia's quiet kindness was doing exactly that. And as the days went by, he realized that he wasn't just grateful for the help. He was grateful for her. That evening, when Olivia tucked the kids into bed and came downstairs, James was already sitting at the kitchen table, his laptop open but ignored. He looked up at her, the weariness on his face replaced by something softer, a flicker of warmth. "You're a good influence on them," he said, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. Olivia smiled gently, her eyes meeting his. "I'm just doing my best," she said, her voice humble but filled with quiet pride. "They're good kids." And James realized that she was right, not just about the kids, but about himself too. The more time passed, the more he understood that accepting help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of growth, of learning to let others in. Slowly but surely, Olivia was teaching him that it was okay to lean on someone else, to trust that sometimes a little kindness was all it took to make everything feel a little less heavy. As the weeks passed, the presence of Olivia in the house grew more than just comfortable. It became essential. The children, especially Emma, seemed to flourish with her around, and James couldn't help but notice how her quiet influence was shifting the dynamic in ways he hadn't expected. He'd always seen himself as the sole anchor in their family, the one holding everything together. But Olivia had a way of making the house feel less like a series of individual efforts and more like a team, a family. One afternoon, as he was picking up the kids from school, James found himself lost in thought about how things had changed since Olivia's arrival. He remembered those first days when the house felt like it was teetering on the edge of chaos. Now, the children were laughing more, Emma had started showing him her sketchbook without hesitation, and Ben had stopped his daily resistance to school, a marked improvement. It was as if their lives had gained a rhythm that wasn't there before. He found Olivia sitting on the porch one evening, staring out into the yard where the kids were playing. Her expression was distant, thoughtful. "Everything okay?" James asked, stepping outside. He hadn't realized how much time had passed since he last checked in with her. Olivia looked over at him, offering a small smile. "Yeah, just thinking," she replied. She adjusted the blanket around her legs, pulling it tighter against the evening chill. "It's been a strange few months." James nodded, sensing the undercurrent of sadness that seemed to linger in her words. She had shared little about her past, other than that she'd had a rough patch. But there were still so many things about her that remained unexplained. Her quiet, reserved nature was both comforting and, at times, distant. He couldn't help but wonder what had brought her to this point in her life. Strange how, he asked gently, sitting down beside her. She shrugged, looking out over the yard again. I don't know. It's just nice. Being here, being part of something. I haven't felt that in a long time. James didn't speak for a while, letting the silence stretch between them. The warmth of the evening sun was slowly fading, and the air was growing cooler. In the distance, the sound of Ben's laughter echoed through the yard, followed by Emma's shout of triumph as she raced him to the tree by the fence. For the first time in months, the house felt full, not just in the physical sense, but in a way that resonated deeper, emotionally. Do you ever think about where you're going next? James asked. His voice was soft, tentative. He didn't want to push, but the question lingered in the air. Olivia turned to face him then, her eyes more open than he'd seen them before. She hesitated, her lips pressed tightly together. All the time, she admitted. But I don't have answers yet. I guess I'm still figuring it out. He nodded, unsure what else to say. But then, for the first time in their conversation, she turned to him with a look that was almost like understanding. She was still a mystery to him, but there was something about her presence that made him feel less isolated in his own uncertainty. You've helped more than you know, he said quietly. The words surprised him as they left his mouth, but they felt right. Olivia gave him a small, almost shy smile. I'm just doing what I can. The next few days were filled with an underlying current of change, an unspoken understanding that things were shifting in the house. Emma, in particular, began seeking out Olivia's company more and more. She started asking for Olivia's help with her homework, and soon, the two were spending hours on end working on small art projects together. Olivia had a natural way of making the work feel like fun instead of a chore, and Emma found herself excited to show her new drawings. She no longer hesitated to talk about her friends, her worries, or her dreams. One evening, James walked into the living room to find Olivia and Emma sitting on the couch, each with a sketch pad in hand. Ben was sprawled on the floor with his toys, creating his own little world with action figures. It was a picture of domesticity that James hadn't realized he had been craving until he saw it. Can I show you some things? Emma asked, looking up at him as he stepped into the room. She opened her sketchbook and presented a drawing of a house, a bright, colorful home with a red roof and windows that seemed to sparkle. Wow, that's beautiful, James said, kneeling down beside her. He felt a lump form in his throat as he looked at the picture, a small yet powerful symbol of what Emma had begun to imagine again. For so long, he had seen her withdrawn, her emotions shielded behind a wall. But now, she was sharing pieces of herself in a way he hadn't seen in a long time. Olivia smiled from her place across the room, watching the exchange between father and daughter. She's been working on it for days, Olivia said softly. I think it's a reflection of how she's been feeling. Safe. Like she's starting to believe again. James turned to Olivia, the weight of her words settling into him. He hadn't realized how much Emma's emotional state had shifted in the past few weeks. Olivia hadn't just been helping with the kids. She'd been helping to heal the invisible wounds that still lingered in their family. As the days turned into weeks, James found himself struggling with a growing realization. He had started to depend on Olivia, not just for the practical things, like helping with the kids or picking up his slack around the house, but in ways that were harder to admit. She had become more than just a guest. She was a cornerstone of their daily life. The more time he spent with her, the more he admired her quiet strength and resilience. There was something about the way she carried herself, the way she seemed to face the world without complaint, that made him want to know more about her. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table after dinner, James spoke up again, his voice more hesitant than usual. You've helped me more than you probably realize, Olivia. She looked at him, her expression soft but unreadable. I'm just doing what anyone would do. It's nothing special, but James knew better. He'd always been someone who carried the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, someone who prided himself on being self-reliant. But with Olivia in their lives, the burden had lessened. It was as if she'd come into their home at just the right moment, not only to help him, but to help the kids, help them rebuild the foundation of trust and connection that had cracked when Sarah left. I don't know what I would have done without you, he admitted, his voice low but sincere. Olivia didn't respond immediately. She just looked at him with that same quiet understanding. There was no need for grand gestures or elaborate words between them, just a simple acknowledgement that things had changed, and for the first time in a long time, that change felt like something positive. "I'm not going anywhere," she finally said. "You don't have to worry about that." James felt something in his chest loosen. He didn't know what the future held for either of them, but for now, they were here together. And that in itself was enough. As the days stretched into a month, James began to notice a subtle but undeniable shift within himself. The house, once an echo of loneliness and the residue of unspoken grief, had transformed into something warmer. It wasn't just the kids who were changing. James was, too. He had become more present, more willing to let go of the impossible ideal of doing everything alone. Olivia's quiet influence had loosened the grip of his isolation, not through grand gestures or overt declarations, but through the small, consistent acts of care she offered every day. One Saturday afternoon, James was in his office, attempting to catch up on a backlog of emails, when Emma burst into the room without knocking, as usual. "Dad, can I talk to you?" "Of course," James said, looking up from his screen. He wiped a hand over his face, trying to shake off the fatigue. "What's on your mind?" Emma stood hesitantly by the door, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. I don't want to go to the school play. I don't think anyone will be there." James frowned, confusion knitting his brow. "What do you mean? No one will be there?" Emma's eyes darted to the floor. "Everyone's parents will be there, and they'll all be in their fancy clothes, and I don't have that. I don't have anything nice to wear." James stood up, walking over to her, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her voice. He hadn't realized how much Emma had internalized the absence of Sarah in their lives, how deeply the little moments, like school events, had started to sting. "Emma, you don't have to worry about that. You're going to look beautiful, no matter what you wear." He paused, gently lifting her chin so that she met his gaze. "I'm proud of you, and I'll be there, no matter what. You'll never be alone." Emma's lips quivered slightly, and for a moment, it seemed like she might cry. Instead, she nodded and clutched the paper in her hands, a glimmer of relief passing over her face. "Thanks, Dad." But before she could leave, Olivia appeared in the doorway, her presence as quiet and unassuming as ever. She had a way of slipping into a room without disrupting the flow, and yet, somehow, her presence was always felt. "Everything okay?" Olivia asked gently, looking from James to Emma. "I just don't feel like I belong at the play," Emma confessed, her voice small. Olivia smiled softly. "I bet you'd look amazing in anything, but how about we go shopping tomorrow? We can find you something that makes you feel good, just for you." Emma's eyes widened, surprised. "Really?" Olivia nodded. "Of course. It'll be fun. We can make a day of it." James watched the exchange, his chest tightening with a mixture of gratitude and awe. Olivia's ability to make Emma feel special, to make her believe in herself again, was something he hadn't been able to do, despite his best efforts. Olivia wasn't trying to replace anything or anyone. She wasn't trying to fix Emma. She simply existed in a way that allowed Emma to open up in a way she hadn't been able to before. The next day, the three of them went shopping. Emma's nerves seemed to dissolve as she tried on dresses in front of the mirror, with Olivia offering lighthearted suggestions and James watching from the bench, a quiet but present observer. It was a simple afternoon, but it felt like a pivotal moment in Emma's life, one that she would remember, a moment when she felt seen, when she realized that things didn't have to be perfect for her to be valued. James had always tried to create stability for his children. He had always tried to shield them from the chaos, but he now realized that stability wasn't about controlling everything, it was about connection. And Olivia, by simply being present in their lives, had deepened that connection. Later that evening, when they sat around the dinner table, Emma's excitement was palpable. "I can't wait to show everyone my dress. I think it's the prettiest one there. You will look beautiful," James affirmed, his heart full. It wasn't just the dress. It was the way Emma's face lit up, the way she had started to believe in herself again. Olivia smiled softly, watching the exchange between father and daughter. She wasn't looking for praise or attention, but it was clear that the small moments like these, meant something more. Over the next few weeks, the changes became undeniable. Emma's confidence continued to grow, and even Ben, once a whirlwind of mischief and noise, had started to settle into a quieter rhythm. His tantrums became fewer, and his need for constant attention lessened. He had taken to sitting with Olivia at bedtime, asking her to read to him when James was caught up with work. Olivia had an uncanny way of drawing him in, of making him feel heard and important without ever being forceful. James watched these small but significant changes with a mix of admiration and disbelief. He was grateful for the help, but more than that, he was grateful for the feeling that things were beginning to click, that maybe, just maybe, the house was starting to feel like a home again. Then, one evening, as James was finishing up with some paperwork in the study, Olivia knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. James looked up, surprised by her tone. "Of course. Everything okay?" She paused for a moment before stepping into the room. "I've been thinking a lot lately about the future." James leaned back in his chair, curious. "The future?" "Yeah. I know I've been here for a while now, and I guess I want to be clear. I want to help, but I don't want to overstep. I've gotten close to the kids, and I think we've made a good routine, but I don't want to make you feel like I don't know, taking over?" James studied her for a moment, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. He had never once felt like she was taking over, quite the opposite, in fact. She was there when needed, but never in the way. "No," he said softly, standing up and walking over to her. "You've never overstepped. You've helped in ways I didn't even know I needed, and I'm thankful for that." Olivia looked at him, her eyes steady, searching his face for any trace of doubt. "I just wanted to make sure I wasn't becoming too much." James shook his head, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "You're not. You've been a godsend, Olivia. I don't know how I'd do this without you." Her face softened at his words, and for a brief moment, their eyes met with an unspoken understanding. It wasn't just about practical help. It was about the unspoken bond that had begun to form between them. One built on mutual respect, patience, and, above all, understanding. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice full of sincerity. James nodded, a small weight lifting off his shoulders. "Thank you for everything." As the weeks went by, James found that his fear of relying on someone else, of letting down his guard, began to fade. The house no longer felt like a place he had to manage alone. The transformation had been slow but undeniable, and the more time passed, the more he realized that Olivia had become an integral part of their lives, part of their family in a way that he hadn't expected. He still didn't know what the future held, whether Olivia would stay or eventually move on. But for now, the house was a place of laughter, understanding, and quiet growth, a place where connections were being rebuilt, one small, unspoken moment at a time. And in that moment, James realized that maybe, just maybe, he had found something he never thought he would, a second chance at family. The weeks that followed Olivia's quiet revelation about her uncertain future were a time of introspection for James. Life had become a delicate balance of routines and unspoken understandings, and it was hard to imagine what the family dynamic would look like if Olivia ever decided to leave. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just about the daily help she provided. It was about the way she had transformed their home into a place of healing, comfort, and unexpected joy. One morning, James woke up to a quiet house, something that had become a rare luxury. Emma and Ben had spent the night at a friend's house, and Olivia had gone out to run some errands. The house felt empty, not in a bad way, but in a way that made him realize just how much their presence had filled the space over the last few months. As he sipped his coffee, sitting at the kitchen counter, he found himself thinking about the future, about how things had changed, and what might be coming next. He heard the familiar jingle of the front door opening, followed by the sound of Olivia's footsteps. She came into the kitchen, her face bright from the sunlight streaming through the windows. She smiled when she saw him, and for a brief moment, they simply exchanged looks of quiet understanding. "Morning," she greeted him softly, setting her purse down on the table. "Morning," he replied, his voice a little more thoughtful than usual. He studied her for a moment, feeling a flicker of unease in his chest. There was something different about the way he was looking at her now, something that felt almost like a shift in the air. Olivia noticed the change in his expression and tilted her head. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her tone curious but not intrusive. James set his coffee cup down, his fingers tracing the edge absently. "I've been thinking about everything. About how much has changed. How much you've changed things." She didn't interrupt, just waited for him to continue. "I know you've told me you're not looking for anything permanent, but..." He trailed off, unsure how to put his thoughts into words. He had never been the type to voice his vulnerabilities, especially not so openly. But with Olivia, something about her quiet strength had loosened his tongue, allowed him to say things he had been holding in for far too long. "But..." Olivia prodded gently, taking a seat across from him. "But I think I'm starting to realize just how much I need you here," he said, his voice quieter now, almost apologetic. The words hung between them, heavier than he had expected. Olivia's expression softened, but she didn't say anything immediately. Instead, she let the silence linger, allowing him to gather his thoughts. She was good at that, letting people speak without forcing them to. "I don't want to take anything for granted," he added, his gaze dropping to the counter. "You've been amazing for the kids, for me, for this whole house. I guess I just never imagined that I would come to rely on you so much. And it scares me." Olivia didn't shy away from his confession. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving his face. "James, I'm not going anywhere unless you want me to," she said quietly, her voice steady. "But I understand why you'd feel that way. You've had to carry so much on your own for so long. Letting someone in, really letting them in, can feel like a huge risk. But I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm just trying to be here, to help." The simplicity of her words, the truth in them, hit James harder than he expected. The knot in his stomach loosened just a little, but it wasn't gone. He still wasn't sure what it meant, what would happen next. But in this moment, he realized something. Maybe it wasn't about needing Olivia to stay forever. Maybe it was about learning how to lean on someone without fearing that it would break him. It was about trusting again. "I know," he finally said, his voice quieter now. "And I'm grateful. More than I can put into words." Olivia smiled faintly, her eyes softening as she reached across the table, her hand resting lightly over his. "You don't have to put it into words," she said gently. "I think we both know what we're building here. And it's enough." As the days passed, James found himself confronting something new. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to let go of some of the fear he had been carrying. The fear that relying on someone else would make him weak. The fear that letting someone close would lead to more pain, more loss. With Olivia, those fears began to dissipate, slowly replaced by the understanding that vulnerability didn't equate to weakness. It was a sign of strength, of growth. One evening, after dinner, the three of them, James, Olivia, and the kids, were sitting together in the living room. Emma and Ben were snuggled up on the couch with their sketchbooks, while Olivia and James sat across from them, just enjoying the quiet. It was a peaceful evening, the kind James had always dreamed of, but never thought he'd have. "I think we should plan something," Olivia said suddenly, breaking the silence. She glanced at James, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe a weekend trip. Something simple, just to get away from the usual routine." James looked at her, surprised but intrigued. "Where would we go?" Olivia shrugged. "I don't know yet. I was thinking somewhere close. We could rent a cabin or find a cozy spot by the lake. Just a few days to get out of the house and, well, just be together." The idea felt both exhilarating and terrifying. He'd never been one for spontaneous trips, always preferring the safety of predictability. But something about Olivia's suggestion felt right. It wasn't just a getaway from their everyday lives. It was a step forward, a chance to experience something new together as a family. The thought of it sparked something inside him, something he hadn't realized he'd been longing for, the possibility of creating new memories, new traditions together. "I think that sounds like a great idea," James said, his voice steady but warm. "Let's do it." Over the next few weeks, the plan for their weekend trip came together. As they packed for the trip, James realized how much Olivia had become a part of their lives, not just as someone helping in the background, but as someone who was becoming a true member of their family. It wasn't just about practical help anymore. It was about the deep, unspoken bond that had formed between them, the trust that had grown, and the way they had all begun to heal together. As they drove to their destination, the children laughing in the back seat, Olivia beside him in the front, James felt a quiet sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't perfect, and he didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like they were on the right path. For the first time, he felt hopeful about what was ahead. The weekend was everything they had hoped for, cozy, quiet, filled with moments of laughter and connection. It wasn't grand or extravagant, but it was exactly what they needed. A reminder that they didn't need to be perfect, that there was no finish line to reach, only the journey of finding joy in the small moments along the way. And as they drove home, the kids asleep in the back seat, James looked over at Olivia, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the dashboard light. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't need to. He had everything he needed right there with him, his family, his home, and the quiet certainty that they were building something strong together. The weeks following their weekend getaway were a time of deep reflection for James. The trip had been a turning point, a reminder that, despite the weight of their pasts, the future was still wide open. The quiet moments in the cabin, the laughter that filled the air, and even the quiet conversations shared around the dinner table were enough to make him realize something. Their family wasn't broken. It was evolving, slowly but steadily, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that things could be better. But with that realization came the quiet hum of uncertainty. Life wasn't perfect. Olivia had, in her subtle way, become an essential part of their world. Yet, there remained a lingering question in James's mind. What would happen when the inevitable happened? Would she stay, or would she eventually move on? He had been too afraid to ask her, too afraid to face the possibility of her leaving, but the doubt still lingered, like a shadow that grew longer with each passing day. One afternoon, as the children were napping, James found himself alone in the kitchen, preparing lunch. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, and as he sliced vegetables for salad, his mind wandered, as it often did these days. He thought about Olivia's quiet presence, the way she always seemed to know just when the kids needed her, the way her calm demeanor had brought a sense of peace to their chaotic lives. He thought about the times she had stepped in without being asked, the small, unspoken sacrifices she had made for their family. And despite everything, he still didn't know where they were headed. Just then, the front door creaked open, and Olivia stepped inside, a light breeze trailing in with her. She had been out for a walk, her long strides taking her through the neighborhood that had come to feel like home. There was a quiet serenity about her, as if she carried the weight of the world, but never let it show. She smiled when she saw him, her presence steady and grounding. "Everything okay?" she asked, setting her bag down by the door and kicking off her shoes. James nodded, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, just thinking." Olivia raised an eyebrow, sensing his distraction. "About?" He hesitated. It wasn't like him to be so open about his uncertainties, especially when it came to their living situation. But there was something about the way she had become a part of their lives, how effortlessly she had woven herself into their routine, that made him feel like he could share these thoughts without fear of pushing her away. "I've been thinking about us," James said slowly, placing the knife down and turning to face her. His words felt heavy, though he couldn't quite pinpoint why. Olivia's gaze softened, and she nodded, as though expecting this conversation. "What about us?" "I don't know what the future holds," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "You've been here for so long, and I don't want to make you feel like you have to stay. But I can't help but wonder what happens when you're not here anymore. I don't want to lose what we've built." There was a long pause, the silence between them thick with unspoken emotions. Olivia crossed the room, sitting down at the table, her posture casual, but her expression serious. She looked at him with a quiet intensity, as though weighing his words carefully. "I'm not going anywhere, James," she said softly, her tone reassuring but not dismissive. "At least not unless you want me to. But I need you to understand something. I didn't come here to fix things for you, or to play a role in your family. I came here because I saw something in you, in the kids, that made me want to be part of this in whatever way that would look like. But it's not about staying out of obligation. It's about connection. And if we're building something here, together, then that's enough for me." Her words struck a chord deep within him. James had always thought of love, family, and connection as something that needed to be fixed or managed, a series of steps he had to navigate on his own. But Olivia's calm certainty, the way she spoke of their future without pressure, made him realize that maybe it wasn't about finding the perfect answer. It was about embracing the uncertainty, trusting that they could move forward together. "I'm not asking you to stay forever," James said after a moment, his voice thick with emotion. "But I don't want you to feel like you're walking on eggshells either. I want you to feel like you belong here." Olivia smiled, a soft and knowing smile that made James's heart skip. "I already feel like I belong, James. I don't need you to do anything to prove that to me. Just keep being you. Keep letting me be part of your life, and we'll figure the rest out as we go." The weight that had been pressing on his chest lifted slightly. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, even if he didn't have all the answers. The conversation stayed with James in the days that followed. He found himself reflecting on the nature of family, of connection, and of how much he had learned about the strength of vulnerability. In the past, he had been consumed with the idea of control, of keeping things together, even if it meant sacrificing his own emotional needs. But now, he was slowly starting to realize that true strength came not from keeping things locked up, but from opening up, from allowing the people around him to share in the burden and the joy. As the days turned into weeks, the family continued to grow closer. Olivia was no longer just a guest in their lives. She had become an integral part of their daily rhythm. It wasn't just the way she made dinners or helped with the kids. It was the way she had become a source of quiet support, someone who didn't demand but simply offered what she could. The kids, especially Emma, had come to rely on her in ways they hadn't relied on anyone else since Sarah's departure. Emma had started to open up more, sharing her hopes and fears in a way that felt more grounded, more confident. Ben, too, had started to show a more playful side, his laughter filling the house in ways that had been absent before. Even James had changed. He was still the same father, the same man trying to balance work and family, but he had softened. There was a gentleness in the way he interacted with the kids, a patience that had been hard to come by in the past. His moments with Olivia had become a small sanctuary, a place where he could breathe, where he didn't feel like he had to be everything to everyone all the time. One afternoon, while the kids were outside, James and Olivia sat on the porch, the golden light of late afternoon casting long shadows across the yard. They were silent for a moment, just watching the kids play. The wind rustled the leaves in the trees, and for the first time, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt calm, like everything was exactly as it should be. "I've been thinking," James said suddenly, breaking the quiet. He glanced over at Olivia, his gaze steady. "I want to try something different. I want to stop trying to control everything. I want to trust more. Trust that whatever happens next will happen for a reason. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I want to be open to it. To you, to us." Olivia turned to him, her eyes soft but full of understanding. "I think that's the best thing you could do for yourself, for this family," she said quietly. "And I'll be here, whatever that looks like." James smiled, a genuine smile that felt new. "Thank you," he said simply, his heart full. As they watched the kids run around, laughing and playing without a care in the world, James realized that the future wasn't something to fear. It wasn't something to control. It was something to embrace, and it was unfolding right in front of him, with every small, unexpected change, every quiet moment of connection. And for the first time, he felt ready to walk into it, uncertain, yes, but no longer afraid. The morning after their heartfelt conversation, something seemed to shift in the air. There was a lightness in the way James moved through his day, a calm confidence that had been missing for years. He no longer felt weighed down by the uncertainties that had once consumed him. Instead, there was a quiet understanding that things didn't need to be perfect to be worthwhile. He had his family. He had Olivia. And for the first time, he felt ready to embrace whatever the future held. Over the next few weeks, their lives seemed to flow with a new rhythm. The routines they had once clung to with such rigidness now felt fluid, with room for spontaneity and joy. The kids were thriving in ways he hadn't expected. Emma, who had been so withdrawn since her mother's departure, began to smile more, to engage more with Olivia and with him. Her once muted voice now rang with laughter, her confidence growing with each passing day. Ben, too, had changed. His natural energy had been tempered by Olivia's steadying presence, and he was becoming a more thoughtful, attentive little boy. James found himself marveling at the transformation, both in his children and in himself. He was no longer just a man trying to survive each day. He was a father learning how to thrive, how to be present, how to create a home where love wasn't just a concept but a daily reality. And through it all, Olivia was there, not just as a helper, but as a partner, a friend, and, in many ways, a guiding force. It was late one afternoon, a few weeks after their discussion about the future, when the opportunity for change arrived unexpectedly. James had received an email that morning, a job offer for a new role, a promotion at his company, one that would require him to relocate. The position came with a substantial salary increase, the kind of opportunity that he had been waiting for professionally. It was the next step in his career. But as he read through the email again, he felt no excitement, no rush. Instead, a quiet dread washed over him. The move would be huge for his career, but it would also mean leaving everything behind. Leaving Olivia, leaving the children's school, uprooting the stability they had worked so hard to build. James sat with the decision for a few hours, weighing his options. He could take the job, he could make the move. It would be the logical step, but it wouldn't be the right one for his family. As he was lost in his thoughts, Olivia appeared at the door of his office, her presence as calming as always. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but concerned. James looked up from the screen, meeting her eyes. He didn't even try to hide the turmoil on his face. "I got an offer today. A big one. It's a huge opportunity for my career, but..." He hesitated, unsure of how to put the next part into words. "It would mean uprooting everything. Moving somewhere else. I don't know what to do." Olivia came into the room, pulling up a chair next to him. She didn't need to ask for details. She could see the internal struggle written all over his face. "You don't have to make a decision right away," she said, her voice soft, but with a quiet strength behind it. "But you know you don't have to do this alone. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. I'm here." The simple reassurance sent a wave of relief through him. He had been so focused on carrying everything himself that he had forgotten the most important thing, that he didn't have to. For the first time, he realized that the future wasn't just about making the right career move or finding the perfect balance. It was about doing it together as a family. "I don't think I want to leave," James said, the words coming more easily now. "Not if it means taking us out of everything we've built here. This, what we've created, it's more important than the next promotion. More important than anything." Olivia smiled softly, her hand resting gently on his. He had expected sympathy, perhaps even an attempt to console him, but instead, Olivia had given him something far more profound: acknowledgement. She wasn't trying to fix him or take away the pain. She was simply telling him that it was okay to carry it, that healing didn't mean forgetting. "You're right," he said, his voice soft. "It's just hard sometimes, you know? The kids are doing so well. I'm doing better. But then something happens, and it all comes rushing back. I think about Sarah, about what happened with Sophie, and I feel like I'm failing them somehow." Olivia's hand found his in the darkness, her grip firm and steady. "You're not failing them, James. You're here. You're present. And that's what they need most. You can't change what happened in the past, but you can be the best father, the best man for them now." Her words settled over him like a balm, soothing the old wounds that had never fully healed. He didn't need to forget the past to move forward. He just needed to accept it as part of who he was and let it shape him without defining him. As summer approached, Their little family began to feel like an unstoppable force, a team united in love and resilience. James continued to immerse himself in the simple joys of daily life, knowing that the mundane moments were the ones that made life truly beautiful. The laughter of his children, the gentle presence of Olivia, and the quiet moments they shared together had become everything he had once longed for but never truly understood how to create. Olivia, too, had begun to dream again. Her life had been so uncertain, full of stops and starts, but now, for the first time, she felt grounded. She had a purpose here, a place where she truly belonged. And in turn, she began to take more risks, to invest more in her own happiness. She started working on a personal project, something she had always wanted to do, opening a small art studio in the neighborhood. It was a dream she had put on hold for so long, but now, with the support of James and the kids, she felt ready to bring it to life. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Olivia shared the news with the family. "I've been thinking about starting something of my own," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "A little art studio. Something small, just a place to bring people together and share the love of art." The kids were immediately excited. "That sounds amazing," Emma exclaimed. "We can help. I can paint the walls, and Ben can help with the decorations." James felt a rush of pride as he looked at Olivia, her eyes sparkling with passion and determination. He had never seen her so alive, so ready to take on something of her own. "I think it's a great idea," he said, his voice full of support. "You've been so dedicated to all of us, and now it's time for you to focus on something for yourself. I'll help in any way I can." In that moment, James realized how far they had come. They were no longer two people trying to navigate life alone. They were a family, built on shared dreams, hard work, and love. And together, they would continue to move forward, embracing every challenge and celebrating every success. The grand opening of Olivia's art studio was everything they had hoped for. The small space, nestled in a quiet part of town, had been transformed into a warm, welcoming haven. The walls were adorned with Emma's paintings, colorful and full of life, while Ben had helped create small wooden shelves to display art supplies. It was a family effort, and as they watched the first group of visitors come through the door, James couldn't help but feel proud. This was Olivia's dream, yes, but it was their dream, too. As the evening wore on, with laughter and music filling the air, James found himself standing outside the studio, watching Olivia talk to a group of artists who had come to support her. The kids were inside, laughing with the new friends they had made. It was a moment of pure contentment, and in it, James found clarity. This was the future. This was what he had worked so hard for: the love of his family, the joy of seeing them grow, and the courage to face whatever came next together. He had let go of the fear that had once consumed him, and in doing so, he had found a peace that felt more complete than anything he had ever imagined. He walked over to Olivia, who was now standing alone, taking a quiet moment to herself. "You did it," he said, his voice full of admiration. She turned to him, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "We did it," she corrected him gently. Together, they stood in the doorway, watching as the stars began to twinkle above, a new chapter unfolding before them. James knew that life would always have its ups and downs, but as long as they faced it together, there was nothing they couldn't handle. And for the first time, he understood what it meant to truly feel at home. I know you guys have already subscribed till now, but if you have not, do like, share, and subscribe.